Welcome to Criminal Psychology Files. Today's story is suspenseful and emotional. The Zombie Hunter of Phoenix. This was a time in the 1990s when the zombie craze was hitting everywhere. From World War Z to the TV series The Walking Dead. Well, in Phoenix, Arizona, a city that's known for its sun-scorched highways, desert silence, there was a secret there. That in the side canals where people in the evening would like to ride your bike and watch the sunset, or wait for the cool evening to come once the sun goes down. There was a series of brutal murders that shattered the calm and comfortable area where people would ride their bikes and all of Phoenix, Arizona. Young women began to vanish. Bodies would be found, and for decades, the case went cold. Until a man, dressed in their own version of a gas mask, driving a car, named, or labeled if you will, the Zombie Hunter, brought it all back to life. This is that story, coming up next on Criminal Psychology Files.
Good evening and welcome to Phoenix News. We interrupt your regular programming with breaking news out of Phoenix, Arizona. A gruesome discovery has shocked the community and have left investigators scrambling for answers. Right now, we're going to head over to the field reporter in reference to the findings of this gruesome discovery.
I'm standing near the Arizona Canal, just west of Metro Center Mall, where earlier today the body of a young woman was found, and what police are calling a brutal and targeted death. What we know so far is that the victim has been identified, and she is of 22 years of age, and her name is Angela Brosso, a recent graduate of Arizona State University. She was last seen riding her bike near the canal, and her body was discovered, mutilated, and that's all the police are willing to say at this time. Authorities say the level of violence is unlike anything that they have seen, and they refuse to comment any more on this at this time. What they are willing to say is that sources close to this investigation describe the scene as ritualistic. The body was posed deliberately as if the killer wanted it to be found. Police are urging anyone who was near the canal that night to please come forward.
Welcome to Criminal Psychology Files. This is Greg Stewart. We're focusing on the Zombie Hunter. And what makes this story so unique is the way this person killed. The way he posed and left the body of the particular person, Angela Brosso. And also just the shock effect of the blood leading with the other victim in reference to being dragged for shock effect. We're going to elaborate a little bit about what kind of killer does this. Why would they pose? What is their persona? Well, you have the power assertion or the dominant killer. They utilize motivation, why they pose the body, and the psychology behind it. So let's go with the motivation. They utilize this to control. This also shows that they're superior and they have a high ego, because when they pose the body, this displays power even after death. A good example is placing the victim in a humiliating or submissive position. The psychology, they need to feel dominant. The body becomes a trophy or proof of control. And usually this shows a narcissistic way of a being. Another one, the sexual or sadistic killer. They utilize this for sexual gratification. They pose the body for fantasy reasons, and their psychology goes into their PTSD or their form of fantasy-driven compulsion. The third is a ritualistic or symbolic killer. They might be in reference to a cult, their obsession of delusion, hence this person, the zombie hunter. Maybe he justified it that certain peoples are zombies. I mean, there were rituals that he had performed in reference to these two victims. Was it organized versus disorganized? Organized killers are more likely to pose a victim, where disorganized killers, their posing may be chaotic, emotional, and rushed. You have the message killer. They want to strike a message to communicate with law enforcement. Look, I'm better, stronger, and smarter than you. And they'll pose the body in a way so it could taunt and confuse and make a statement. Often intelligent but antisocial is their psychology, with an inflated sense of importance or a need for recognition. So let's continue to see if we could figure which one of these fits this particular killer coming up now. Hey friends, before we get into this video, it would really help this channel, and I would really be so grateful to you if you can like, subscribe, share, and comment. It's been going a long way with the growth of this podcast, and it really means a lot to me and my family and everyone else who's watching. So please, once again, like, subscribe, share, and comment. And now on with the story.
The crime was pure evil. What happened to Angela Brosso was just devastating. When they found her body near the Metro Center Mall, Angela was decapitated. Her head was discovered days later in the canal. And from what the officers were saying, whoever had this head, they preserved it. It didn't age from the death. It was as if they froze it or something so they could keep its actual look of shock and fear, opposed to getting waterlogged or sun-ridden. This was just brutal, as if the killer wanted to relive the moment after moment after moment, and they wanted more shock value by placing it in the canal. 10 months would go by, and they thought maybe this was a random killing. They really had nothing to go on. And then a young girl of age 17 by the name of Melanie Bernas. She was home with her mom. Her mom was going to go out for the evening for a dinner date. She decided to take a bike ride along the Arizona Canal. Melanie would not be coming home that evening. The next day, the person who takes that walk on that same area, passing through the canal, noticed a big, dark stain on the concrete, on the sidewalk. And at first, she walked over it and didn't think anything of it. But then it dawned on her, this did not look like a puddle of water. It didn't look like somebody spilled their drink or something. She walked back over, and she realized the large amount of the stain this was, and the coloring of the dark maroonish stain that was on this roadway, to her appeared to look like blood. She immediately called the authorities, and the authorities would confirm that's exactly what it was. And there were trickling blood from that stain, from that puddle, leading just a few feet, little dots, as if it was a path to the end of the canal. And when the officers looked over, and they looked into the water, they discovered the remains of Melanie Bernas. And they were wondering, with this brutality and the pattern that has emerged, do we have a suspect in reference to the form of a serial killer?
So as a detective on the team, we had investigators out there, and it was difficult because we didn't have much to go on. You know, the one thing about these canals is that it's easy to ambush someone. And our guess is that whoever did this did exactly that. Is that they learned someone's routine. And we found out later that Angela, around 7 p.m., would go out on her bike and take that nice stroll. So this was her ritual. She liked exercising, and she loved to do this in the evenings. And it's what most people around this neighborhood do. So she went out just like any other person would, And the saddest part is that she had a birthday. Just a few hours away was going to be our little birthday party. The boyfriend was home, and he went out looking for her 3 or 4 times, from what we recall, and, reached out and said, "This is very odd. My girlfriend went out for a bike ride, and she's nowhere to be found. Can someone come out here and maybe help me?" And he also reached out to her mother. You see, Angela was from Pennsylvania, and she only moved out here, a short time ago. And then something like this happens. You have to call this person's mom and say, "Hey, I don't know where Angela is. Have you heard from her?" And you can imagine the fear that this instills in someone.
So what I want to talk about with this case, and this actually should go in with every case that I've ever covered thus far in criminal psychology files, the one major thing that's always left out is the stress levels of the investigators, of the people that are working these high-level crimes. And all crime is stressful for these officers, these investigators, these detectives, homicide officers, and so on. Do you know the level of percentage, how this escalates? It's amazing that they can still go out there and function and do their job the next day. And that's probably what keeps them going, is knowing I have to solve this riddle. I have to find closure for this family. And the psychology behind it, they say each year it goes up 16.2%, depending on the high level of crime. In this case, this would be considered a high level of crime on top of other ones, don't get me wrong. But when you have to call parents, when you have to let them know that their now loved one is deceased, just getting that, no matter how many times they do it, they're human, they have emotions, and on top of what they're going to get reflected back to them only adds to the PTSD that these officers and investigators are going through. So they become the victim of these animals, these monsters as well. They always have another kill, even if that person's alive. It's the PTSD. That's the living kill, the walking dead, if you will, that happens to these victims' families as well as the officers that keep going. And imagine what a cold case does to them, where I couldn't find it, but they're hoping I'll leave enough information that the next investigator can close this case so we could all have closure and peace of mind. Let's continue the story.
And so at this point, we're looking, we really believe that whoever did this to Angela, they stalked this person before. They knew their MO, so to speak, mode of operation. And then 10 months later, we get a similar crime, if you will, on the younger girl, age 17, high school student, Melanie Bernas. And we got a call to come out because a woman who was walking her child, she believed that she was on a bike, think of it. She was on a bike and she rode through a puddle that appeared to be blood. Can you confirm this? She says, there's weird markings outside of the puddle that also look like someone was dragged somewhere. So when we arrived, she was spot on. Everything she said definitely fit that description. And so, other than that, finding the body in the canal, unfortunately, that this person was killed, there were similarities that really put into our thoughts, we have a form of a serial killer here, and we need to find something and get this person off the streets. Because between the media trying to help us at the same time, people were nervous, people are overwhelmed. They said a younger woman was killed, and now a high school student that goes to the nearby high school. We're afraid. We're afraid for our kids. We're afraid for ourselves. What's going on? What are you doing about it? And eventually, what would happen is that we didn't find anything, and people began to forget about it, deleted it. We just didn't have anything. Our investigation completely stalled because at this time in the early 90s, 1990s, DNA wasn't where it is now in the 2000s. And so it was until 2 decades later from this point that we finally started getting some leads.
During the investigation, the police believed they had a serial killer because of the similarities. The knife that was used on the young girl and the woman, as well as both were assaulted in a way that would leave DNA. Now at this time, the DNA testing was not up to par. So they didn't have anything but thoughts of suspects, but nothing concrete that would come into mind. They had a list, but they couldn't just call people in randomly. So they had to wait for a time where just maybe they could find something that would take this killer off the streets. And that would happen. But it took nearly 2 decades for a person to come and help and identify the killer. During a seminar for forensic specialists and detectives and investigators, a lady noticed after keeping up with the crime of this killer known as the Canal murders. She says, "Excuse me, investigators, I study DNA. I'm a specialist in this field. I use advanced DNA and genealogical techniques, which give me the ability to connect the Y chromosomes with the DNA, which can lead into traces of male lineage. And this is often linked into the computer system. And with that computer system name, we can cross-reference, and it will provide some possible suspects because it will narrow down things to names." And they had nothing else to lose. So they said, "Yes, absolutely, please, make this happen." She took the samples that they had from that murder, and she came up with a name. Now, the name that they came up with was a very common name. That name was Miller. So they looked through the DNA, and they looked at suspects with that last name. And one name in particular stood out. A man by the name of Bryan Patrick Miller. His sample stood out, but more so, his background. His background had an interesting history. And that history started in his youth, when he took a bus ride. And as he was leaving the bus, a woman was leaving at the same time. He let her get slightly ahead of him, only to run past her very quickly and nick her with a knife. Now, at first she thought he bumped him and was just being a troublesome kid. The woman didn't realize she'd been cut. And then all of a sudden she noticed more and more blood. She was able to stop the young man and say, "Why did you do this?" And he ran off, but she got a good look at him. She told the investigators, and they were able to pinpoint this young man, Bryan Miller. She was fortunate, they said, after she left the hospital, just a little more inward, where he cut you away. If he went a little more inward, well, we might not be having this conversation. So they were able to bring him in, and they put him in juvie. And while in juvie, his mother discovered letters. Letters at this young age, her young child, who was a juvenile now delinquent by law, had a recipe in reference to stalking, grabbing someone, hurting them, assaulting, and eventually killing them. This scared his mother to the point that she felt, if he knew or he knows that I discovered this, I may also be a victim. I don't want him here. And he was stuck through the courts to live elsewhere. live elsewhere because his mother, his own mother, feared for her life.
So what do we know? At this point, 2 decades have gone by. There was no more murders, at least that were recorded. And now they never gave up on the case. They kept putting in the system. And if it wasn't for the good fortune of going to this seminar and the investigators noticed this lady speaking of DNA and the new results of testing, she approached the officers knowing that they were on the case and then emphasized, I may be able to help you. And they gave her the samples, and it concluded that whoever did this has the last name Miller. Now, Miller is a very common name, but because of a Miller with a record in his youth, they were able to pinpoint a possible suspect, but they wasn't exactly sure, but the MO definitely fit. But they couldn't bring him in. They couldn't bring him in because they didn't have DNA and they just have a youthful suspicion from his days as a youth. However, they were looking into him anyway, and what they found was that he was actually a local celebrity in the area of Phoenix, Arizona. In what way? Well, zombie craze was big. He was big into the zombie craze. This 40-plus-year-old man now was so big into the zombie craze that he developed an identity by creating a character using an auction police car called the Zombie Hunter. That was his logo. That was his name. And he was dressed to the part. People would pose with him. Police would pose with him. Could you imagine the ego knowing that someone may have killed these women and he's posing with police and hugging and talking and putting this like I'm right under your nose. You don't know it's me. Ha, I got the last laugh. I'm living the life and I got not one, but 2 over on you. How do you like me now? How do you feel about that? But they don't have proof. So they have to get proof. So they come up with a plan to try to get the zombie hunter, Bryan Miller, his DNA. Let's see how they do it.
So at this point, we have to investigate everyone under Miller. But the one we said, let's start with, was when this person was a kid. Well, how are you to get his DNA? Because we can't just bring him in and say, hey, in case he is the killer, he's going to say, I don't have to, you have nothing on me. So we need to be smart about this. And so what we end up doing was, let's use his celebrity. There's a zombie event coming up. Let's do like we've done before. Let's pose with him. Let's make him feel comfortable. And then I'm going to go undercover and I'm going to talk to him like I am a contractor. And I'm going to go, wow, you know what? You've played this part good. And you know what? You're a big guy. And you ever do some security work? Now, what we know is that he worked for Amazon for a point there, and he still does. That's his primary job, I believe in the warehouse area for Amazon. So I'm sure he wouldn't mind making a few extra bucks if he could. So I'm going to approach him and offer him a meetup. And we're going to go to Chili's, and I'm going to see if I can get some DNA there. And that's exactly what happened. So came up to him, and he was very excited, just like I thought he would be. And I said, let's meet up the next day, and we'll discuss some particulars. Well, he came in the Chili, and come to find out, he's a dad. So, and he's easy to speak to, just like he was at the zombie event. So we're speaking, he introduces me to his daughter. They both come in and join us, and very caring, loving father. He takes care of his daughter. He's the main guardian, the main parent, if you will. And so I'm still observing him, but he doesn't seem to me to fit the profile. He's just seems a very likable, lovable dad type. And so, you know, his daughter has something. He ordered a cheeseburger, and I will say this, maybe he was really hungry, but he gulped that down in like 3 to 5 bites. It was gone. And I was waiting for him to have a sip of his drink. I didn't think he was ever going to do it. I even offered him some tea, iced tea, soda, a dessert for the daughter and him. And he declined it. And then eventually made me really happy was that finally had a drink of his water. And at this point, the person playing the busboy would come over, or the waiter, get that and bag it. and we actually didn't send it to the lab and find out what we got here. And so what ends up happening is that he thinks she has a job. I told him, we're going to start your new week. Let me get back to you. And our people are looking at it. He goes, I got to tell you, I don't think we have the right guy on this. I just don't have the right feeling. He seems too normal. And, he sees that as a character, and he's a fun guy. He doesn't love comics, this, that, or what. I'd be very surprised. So a couple days went by, takes a few days. And I remember we're all sitting around. And the head person of the lab literally comes into himself. And I remember one of the officers made a joke and said, looks like we got our guy. And I knew that this was coming in with the DNA. And the person said, he's him. He's the guy. You got him. That's who it is. I was utterly shocked that this was that person.
So the moment the police officers, the investigators, the detectives, everybody involved was excited for this moment. And so Bryan was easy enough to find. They already knew where he worked, but he was home. So they knocked on the door and they arrest him. He's puzzled. What's going on? Well, let's save it over for the police station. Then they bring them. They knew at this point they had their guy. No question. But if they could get more evidence that he finally admits to the crime, it will only add to getting the prosecution done and getting him put behind bars or worse for him. So they tried, and he denied and denied and denied. But the evidence kept adding up with him. We have your DNA. He couldn't explain it. He said, it's not me. I don't know what you have. I don't know how you got it. I don't know why my DNA supposedly was there with the victims. But I'm going to repeat and tell you, it's not me. So do what you have to do. But I'm just going to stay with what I'm doing because I know I'm innocent. So they end up arresting him. And talking to his attorney, his defense attorney, they reference that, look, it's him, and he's insane. At least that's what they were going. And at this point, he was still denying it though. And the attorney said, the defense attorney would say, well, that's because he's not right. He's not all there. And maybe he's in and out of conscious. Maybe it's a split personality, but that's what we're telling you. So we're hoping to get at least a life sentence opposed to the death penalty. Unfortunately for Bryan, he would get the death penalty. The evidence added up to the jury, and Bryan would be now put on death row. With the evidence that they received, thanks to the new technology of DNA, Bryan would get arrested, in prison, and he would wait on death row. Now, to this day, he's still denying it, but he had some cryptic words to say to the media. And it went something like this.
I had the opportunity to do an interview with Bryan Miller, and he's being held in the Florence, Arizona Diamond Prison Complex, also known as the Special Management Unit. And when I was speaking to him about the things he was convicted of, he obviously still denied it, which is what he did all in the courtroom. And so I emphasized, what are you feeling right now? He was definitely not happy. He would say, it's awesome, great. I'm even more isolated from those I care about. Then he emphasized on the food that it is not great and that the cells are getting very cold now because the temperature is falling. And I would ask him, so you're sentenced to death in June 2023 for murders of Angela Brosso and Melanie Bernas. And again, as I stated, he continued to deny. When I asked how his DNA was found on both victims, he replied, that's the $1 million question. If I had a provable answer to that, I wouldn't be in this situation now, would I? And you could hear the agitation and anger behind this. And I emphasized during this trial while defense psychologists argued about you going in and out of amnesia or feeling that Your attorney said you're insane. You seem pretty normal here. And he said, my diagnosis is real. I have moments of blacking out. But despite my blacking out, I can tell you I never murdered anybody. I never did anything. So I disagree with the experts. I maintain once again, I did not do those murders. And I emphasized again, well, the court heard your testimony and they heard what your attorney said in reference also to your childhood, that your mother was very abusive. And unfortunately, she did pass in 2010. And she did apologize for anything that she said to hurt you. Her intentions were not to hurt you. But there was a portrait painted of her psychology and where these violent tendencies had come from. And then there is also the case of your ex-wife. Your ex-wife, who took the stand against you, also said that she described dates as a wonderful moment at times and also a roller coaster of emotions. How do you feel about that? Because she also emphasized that you would mention that in your past you had killed someone and that you did some things beyond just murdering them. And he tended to say, well, none of these things happened. I never really cared for this person. I don't like this person. It wouldn't surprise me if they're trying to just make something out of this deal, make some money, make a movie, who knows what. But this is all just hearsay. There is no proof. And that's that. And from the charming person in the beginning, he was so agitated and angry that a lot of people, after hearing this, said, well, maybe he does have multiple personalities, or maybe he does go in and out of consciousness. And then there's the case of another person that they say is maybe your first victim, I emphasized. And her name is Brandy Myers, the forgotten girl. Back in May 1992, just shortly before the other crimes had taken place, you had a neighbor, and she went out doing the fundraiser. Supposedly, she knocked at your door, and nobody ever seen this person again. And they felt that you were the person, but they had no physical evidence that could say otherwise. Again, I'm not going to reflect on something that had nothing to do with me. People are going to believe what they want to believe. People are going to wear a certain mask out there. And I can tell you this, between the 3 young women, the 3 lives that people say I stole, well, there's a lot of people that live behind the mask who may never fully reveal themselves. And I can tell you this, I'm not with this interview because none of these equal to me. And that was the end of our interview. This is that story. This is what he said to me. And whether he is insane and he should have done time behind bars, or he did deserve the death penalty, the jury had spoken, as well as the court. And this is what was said. This is how it ended. And now people in Phoenix, Arizona can rest easy, at least for now. And this was our interview.
So this will conclude our Criminal Psychology Files podcast today in reference to the zombie hunter and the canal killer. What is your take on this? What is your take on him? Did he really have multiple personality disorder, or was this just a ploy for him to Bryan Miller to avoid the death penalty, which did not happen in this case? And also the PTSD is what they said earlier about police officers in reference to also that there's always still a victim, meaning the person who is suffering, who lost a family member, but also the police officer who wasn't able to solve the crime because of a person would admit it or it becomes a cold case. So I'd love to hear in the comments what you think and feel about this particular case. But until next time, we hope you have a great day or evening wherever you are. Thanks for watching Criminal Psychology Files.